Hi everybody, so over the next couple of videos that you'll see over the next couple of days, I'm going to do some context work with you. So the very first thing that you need to either have a blank piece of paper or you need to have a page in your exercise book ready, and on that you just want to write the title of the poem in the middle and the poet that it's by. So we are going to start off by looking at London, that's by William Blake, and essentially you will end up with something like this. So you need to get ready, have all of this ready, pens at the ready, lots of nice colours here, so it looks really lovely, and we will begin. Okay, so for today we're just going to go through the context and a little bit of background to do with London by William Blake. So this is the second poem from the identity cluster that we've been looking at. So you've done the first one by watching Mrs. Webb's video. So this is the first type of context. So you need to take a blank page or a page in your exercise book, and you just need to have London by William Blake written right in the middle of it. I'm going to take you through some of the key details and you're just going to populate it with me. Okay, so the first thing that we need to be aware of is that this poem was written or published in 1794. So what you need to be aware of then, that is the 18th century. It's right at the end of the 18th century, so nearly coming into the early 19th century. Now, we know that this is essentially classed as, this is Victorian London. We know quite a lot about Victorian London from our work that we have done on things like Christmas Carol. So what we need to be aware of is the following. That London, during the 18th century, was a city of contrasts. Now what you'll know from that then, you should be able to be aware that there is a massive gulf then between the very wealthy and the poorest in society. What you're also aware is that they lived in very close proximity to one another. So there wasn't a massive distance. There wasn't areas where the wealthy people lived and then there weren't sort of just sections where the poorest lived. They pretty much lived on streets that kind of backed onto each other. So this was quite difficult. Now, what you're aware from this is that the poorest in society had a tough time. They had to fight to survive using any means necessary. Okay, what you've got, they had few rights. And they had little to no voice. So they needed people to speak on their behalf. They needed the philanthropists. They needed the people who were interested in social reform to be there. They essentially had a very, very difficult time. Now, this is written in 1794. Now, what you might be aware of then, if we put another key date in, is that in 1789, so 5 years before the publication of this poem, came the French Revolution. If you've watched Les Mis, or you've seen the film, or you've watched the musical, or you know anything about the French Revolution, then you'll be aware that at this time the lower classes rose up against nobility and they seized power. They stormed the walls of the Place de la Bastille, which is where the monarchy lived. They stormed the palace walls and it turned France into a republic. Essentially, the little people overthrew the bigger people and it gave lower class citizens a bit of a voice. So what you need to know, lower class citizens rose up against nobility and seized power. Now, this was a very powerful message for people at the time. This was a very powerful message for people like William Blake. He he was given this new political urgency as a result of the French Revolution. There was a lot of musing, so a lot of people were talking and thinking about social change, social reform, but actually the French Revolution gave these people something to really fight against and something that they could use within their own context. So this gave new political urgency to Blake's views. And those views found their way out in poems like London, published in the collection of poems, Songs of Innocence and Experience. Okay, but what the French Revolution also did then, if we come over to here, it attracted attention from social reformers. So people who were interested in the idea of social change, who were interested in the idea of better rights for the poor, giving a voice to the poor and equal opportunities, they were quite inspired by what happened over in France, especially Europe. It's not far. And they used this to inspire their own writings, their own words. Gave people quite a lot of hope, and I think that's something to be aware of. At this time then, in 1794, Blake lived and worked in London. Okay, so he would see firsthand what was going on. So this was written from first-hand experience. And we see this primarily through the use of the first-person pronoun that Blake used throughout the poem. I wander through each charted street near where the charted Thames does flow. And he keeps repeating the things that he has seen. Another thing that we've got to be aware of over here is to do with Blake's own views. Blake was what we would call very anti-establishment. Establishments are those big, organised idea houses, if you want to call them idea houses. What we really mean there is that he disliked institutions such as the church and the monarchy. And this was primarily as a result of these institutions. I mean, in particular, the church's failure to help the poorest in society who were in desperate need. So he was quite angry at the fact that we believe in this deity, we believe in this sort of higher power, but it doesn't actually support those who need it the most. So he was frustrated about the lack of support that this gave to the poorest people. Okay. Other things that we know about London at the time. So about the city of London, there was a massive rise in the population, which led to overcrowding. So these overpopulated streets, these overpopulated houses, as it was expensive to live and the poorest had nothing. So you would find very large families living in very, very small conditions. Okay. You've also got all the difficulties that Blake actually talks about in the poems. So you've got this awful idea of illegitimate children of the poor who were then sold into apprenticeships. This was a huge problem. And if you've ever read the book or watched the film of Oliver Twist by Dickens, you'll see this very, very clearly here. The idea that those who were illegitimate children, so who didn't have a family or who were orphans or who were taken into state care, so usually the care of the parish, which was a warder of the church, and what they would do then to make money for the parish, they would essentially sell these children. So they'd say, well, if you would like to take an apprentice, we will give you this much money. to take them, and they would work for you. Now, this is an odd use of the term apprenticeships, because this is more like slavery, and what I would really suggest is that if you are interested in this, because it will help to inform all of your understanding of texts of the Victorian era, is to actually read Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. And they were sold into these apprenticeships. Now, one of the most common trades for these apprenticeships was chimney sweeps. It was very dangerous. They had to be very, very tiny. They would cram up the chimney sweeps, and it was very dangerous as well. And Blake actually talks about the chimney sweeps within his poem. We also had the issue of prostitution. And then you've got the added issue with the dire housing conditions. These were all persistent problems within the city. They are all the things that Blake was most affronted by and could see and wanted to actually actively campaign about. So he used his voice within his poem to get these ideas across. So what I'm going to leave you with there is some of the basic ideas. This is a lot of the context. I'm then going to link on a bit of reading over on to share my homework for you, and I'd like you to continue populating this mind map to do with the context of London.